all doing? I hope you're able to spend this past week working on your projects. Please remember that Anada and I are here and available during our office hours if you have any questions. I want to reiterate that this project should be as fun as you want to make it. And also, I've received some really great feedback and information as to where you're taking this project and what your research is. So they're amazing. They're great to read. And I also want to reiterate, for those who have not sent us your class projects, please do so we have a record of it, and then we can plan for a final presentation. So today we have so every year I do a different, I change things up every year. And this year, one of the topics that have not been explored much in this course is on freight. And I received an inquiry from a good friend of mine, Francesca Jones, who is now on maternity leave at PBOT, and she had asked to share what PBOT's doing in the master freight plan. And this was last year's request, and we are really delighted this year to bring you and to share with you what we have thus far from our colleagues here at PBOT, who's going to present on the Freight Master Plan. And so this class today will be broken into several groups. And so we haven't done this before, but I really want to use the second part of the class as a breakout opportunity for us to explore more in the idea. So we're going to be broken into different groups, 3 groups. We have about 18 of us. After that, we'll do a report out. But first, I want to introduce to you my colleagues here at PBOT. And I'm really excited to be able to invite them tonight to share with you what they've been working on. So first is Gabriela Giron Valderrama. She's new to PBOT, fresh from Seattle. She's our urban freight coordinator for PBOT. And also a colleague of mine, Denver Igarta, who is with Complete Streets. And in my capacity in working on the Urban Forestry Commission over the years, I've interfaced with Denver, but not so much. So I'm really excited to be able to bring Denver into this class tonight to share with you all the great work that they've been doing. So we have a really full night tonight with some really good activities planned. But I just want to kick it off and welcome you. And one of the cool things is, like, we talk a lot about modes, so many different modes of transportation. How do we integrate all those modes of transportation? One of the big things is like freight. How do we bring freight into our world and move within the circles of our transportation and the needs of everyone? So I will hand it over to Gabriela and Denver to kick it off. Thank you.
Thank you, Tui, so much for this invitation. We're so excited to talk to you about the urban freight system, a topic I'm really passionate about, and also share some of the work that we have been doing in PBOT, but to update the 2006 freight plan and to plan for the next 20 years regarding the urban freight system. So I'm Gabriela Giron, as Tui mentioned. For the past 5 years, I've been working on urban freight research at the Urban Freight Lab at UW. I'm finalizing my PhD, and about 3 months ago, I joined PBOT, and I'm so excited about this new role and using the knowledge I gather from my research and implemented, and now in particularly this moment that we are updating the freight plan. So I think it's a really exciting moment, and and to be aligned with the city goals of equitable, sustainable, and efficient movement. And I also have here Denver, Igarta, my boss. He's the head of the Complete Street team. Denver, I don't know if you want to say some words first before we start.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for having us here. I'm Denver Igarta. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Complete Streets planning manager at the Bureau of Transportation. And I'll give kind of an introduction to what that group does in just a minute.
Yeah, so thank you, Denver. And so for today, we have Denver is going to start talking about what we do in the Complete Street team and PBOT jurisdiction over our infrastructure assets. And then I'm going to go and have an overlook of what is urban freight system, what are the trends and the challenges, and give a little bit of context to what happened because of COVID. And then we're going to talk about the 2040 Portland Freight Plan, and then we're going to dive in the discussion after we have our break between the presentation and the break room.
All right, well, we'll get started. I only have a few slides to do my introduction part, but I did want to give an orientation to what is planning at PBOT and what is the Complete Streets team. I know that you had Art Pierce as a presenter earlier in the class, and he is he's my boss. He's over a group that has planning and capital projects and active transportation. So I kind of actually went back and watched his presentation to see if I have any of the same slides to make sure that you're not getting repeat of what he shared. But I think this is all relatively new content for you. So hopefully that keeps it interesting, but I'm mostly super excited to just introduce how we've been thinking about freight in the city. I was hired at PBOT just after the last freight plan was adopted. And so that was about 15 years ago. And I've been working with the planning group since then, and a lot has changed. And just kind of as a quick orientation to PBOT and what we do, I know when Art was there, Margie Bradway was also there talking about the region. There's a whole planning and policy hierarchy within the state, which I won't go over again, but I'll just share that at PBOT, our primary mission is to partner with the community to plan and build and maintain and an effective and safe transportation system, just to provide ways for people to connect to the places they need to go. And this slide shows, some of the assets that we maintain as part of our role of managing streets, transportation systems, and also being the administrator of the public right-of-way. So this includes around $13 billion worth of assets, including miles of street, thousands of miles of streets, thousands of signals and street lights, hundreds of bridges, retaining walls, hundreds of miles of bike facilities, dozens streetcars, and even one tram. So you can see there in this slide the kind of vast range of things that we're trying to maintain and manage. This slide gives a good glimpse of what we are doing today, what we're managing today. And we'll go to the next slide, which shows, just wanted to just hit on the point that as we're managing roads and streets and transportation systems, we're also looking towards the future. I think Margie and Art did a good job of talking about how we look 20 years down the road. And think about change. And between 2015 and 2035, PBOT is working with other bureaus in the city to plan for what's projected to be 140,000 new jobs and 260,000 new residents in Portland. And that work kind of centered around our comprehensive plan and our transportation system plan, because we need to make sure that we're able to grow and adapt over time as the city's changing, making sure that we're addressing and creating a safe and convenient system for moving about the city, but also addressing challenges that we're continuing to recognize, and including maintaining our natural environment, fostering economic prosperity, and addressing the inequities that exist across our city, and just contributing to the overall quality of life in Portland. Next slide. So the planning division is essentially charged with working with the community to develop sustainable vision for the long-range plans and investment strategies to meet our future needs, and to shape it into an overall policy direction. Like I mentioned, that is tied to our comprehensive planning goals, but for PBOT, it's the transportation system plan that kind of is the primary document that guides our long-range plans. We also are seeking to integrate the needs of all the different modes of transportation. That's really kind of what Complete Streets is all about. But not just the modes of travel, but also other functions of our street, like greening and placemaking. And so to do that, we have our transportation system plan, which helps us prioritize investments. It helps us to resolve policy conflicts and trade-offs that exist from different uses of the right-of-way. So next slide will be my last slide, and it will just show the structure of our planning division. The Complete Streets team is one of 3 sections in the planning division. So we have the first one that's labeled 1 there is our policy innovation and regional coordination. It's a mouthful. That section, they lead the transportation policy initiatives, and they coordinate with our regional partners like Metro, as well as with our other bureaus to advance citywide policies and guide our investments. And like I mentioned, the transportation system plan, they're the keepers of that plan. The second one there listed is the area and projects planning team. That group within planning, they develop multimodal area and corridor plans, mainly focusing on kind of the comprehensive plan designated centers and corridors and kind of adjacent areas. So more geographically focused. They're the keepers of those like specific area plans. And then the third one listed is our section, the Complete Streets team. And I listed all the members of the team, of our team there. We have an ADA disability coordinator. We have our bicycle coordinator, our pedestrian coordinator, transit coordinator, Gabriela, who's our urban freight coordinator. And then we have 2 other planners that support our team. So our job is to help translate our policies into the physical realm. And we do that by preparing and integrating modal plans, so mode specific plans. And those plans have lists of strategies and investments that guide us over a 20-year period. I listed the kind of pedestrian planning that we do as an example of that, but we'll dive deep into the freight plan for the remainder of the presentation. But the pedestrian plan, many of you may know or may have worked on the PED-PDX, which was adopted in 2019. That plan was actually an update to a plan that was adopted in the mid-90s. But that plan has like the pedestrian related policies for the city. It identifies our pedestrian network, identifies implementation strategies for making Portland more walkable. And it also has programs and capital projects that we will be advancing over that 20-year period. So that was adopted in 2019, and one of the main implementation items out of that was to update our pedestrian design guide. And so we're in the middle of doing that now. There's a public draft on our website. That guide provides standards, provides criteria and design guidance on how we design our streets to meet the needs of pedestrians. And so we're excited about that initiative. And I wanted to just mention that example because the pedestrian plan was done a couple of years back, and it's now like being implemented. So it gives you an example of kind of where we're headed also with the freight plan once we have it adopted. So yeah, that's all I have, Gabriela. And so I wanted to introduce again, Gabriela Giron, who is so excited to have her on our team at this critical moment for freight. It is a exciting time. I'm hoping that you'll be excited to hear and learn and engage in the discussion that we're going to have tonight about how freight, the freight systems within our city affect each and every one of us.
Thank you, Denver, so much. So I'm gonna, like I said, we're gonna divide the rest of the presentation into sections. I'm gonna dive in a little bit on the urban freight system, and then gonna talk specifically about PBOT's efforts on the model plan. So as Tui and also Denver was mentioning, we have a set of space that we need to allocate all the competition of the different modes that are trying all this movement of peoples and goods and services in the urban area. One of these really important modes that are moving through our streets is the urban freight system. So let's think a little bit outside the urban freight context. We have a supply chain that tell us the whole journey of a product, from the raw material to the production of that material to the final delivery of that material. This supply chain is a really complex system. Of course, it will depend on what particular product we're talking about, how many raw items do I need to produce that product. But this system, the idea is that it connects all these different types of facilities, stakeholders, and transportation, and through a transportation network that allowed this flow of goods moving from point A to the final destination. And therefore, this transportation network relies on a different set of modes, from marine vessels to airplanes to trains to really big trucks to the smaller vans that we see into our local deliveries. There are different types of configurations of these supply chains that might involve overseas movements or domestic or regional movement, even to the smaller local supply chains. I wanted to show this image that I really like. If we're thinking about buying a lounge chair in a Fred Meyer's local retail store, it can come all the way from Asia, travel to a ship to the port of Portland, then to a truck, then to the regional warehouses, to then the final destination that is the retail store in which we go drive and get that chair from. So to put it in context, the urban freight system is this section of that supply chain. That part of when we go into the city boundaries, to, from, or throughout that city boundary, all that movement that is happening in that section. And actually, this is the most expensive and the most time-consuming section of the overall supply chain. It's really challenging in the congestion street with all this competition of different modes. How do we make that final delivery, particularly when we have less volumes in less volumes in those movements? So think about this really big movement from Asia to the port of Seattle or the port of Portland with really marine vessels, big containers. When we go to the urban space, that is less consolidation and smaller volumes that are being delivered. So it's more challenging and more costly. I really like this graphic. We have a set of gateways that allows that entry or exit of products from the manufacturer to these international, domestic, and regional movements. And it goes to a warehouse when it gets distributed, sorted out, and then to that urban area. Of course, this will not be exactly the same for every urban area. So if we think about the city of Portland, for example, we do have a really important rail infrastructure, the port and the airport right in the middle of the city boundaries. So all those gateways are happening at the same time of all these local deliveries. So we want to focus on that urban goods movement that is really important. And I want to highlight that idea that the urban goods movement is essential to the liability of any city. We need this constant flow and efficient flow of goods, services. Think about your medicine, your groceries, any product that you might need into your day-to-day, that it needs to come down and that we need to meet all the demands of the population that is in any city. So I wanted to talk also that this system is really complex compared to the other parts of the supply chain, and it's really heterogeneous. So if we think about Portland, for example, I wanted to show here the transportation network. We have interstates, arterials, local streets, all connected to each other, supporting this movement, and try to understand the connectivity and how each of these elements play a role into that movement. It's really complex. And then we not only have that, but when we talk about the urban space, we have a different set and a bigger and diverse commercial fleet. Not only when we think about longer trips, that we have these really big trucks on the roads in our interstates. In the urban environment, we have oversized trucks, heavy vehicle trucks, mediums, and they're all the way to those smaller vans that you see, the Amazon Prime, or even when we think about on-demand services that you can provide your own car to make that final delivery. Not only the set of vehicles that we have, but we also should be considering what type of operations they are performing. We don't only, that's why I like to use the term commercial vehicles, because it's not only considering goods delivery, but also construction, service providers, waste management, and then also think about all the reverse flow that is happening with all those returns of all these e-commerce deliveries that are happening. In fact, I was reading an article the other day, and it's around 30% of the products that we buy online that actually get returned. So just think about the complexity on the types of people we have, the transportation network, the type of operations that are happening, and does not even account for all the different stakeholders that we have, from carriers to retailers, to manufacturers, to the port, to the rail, etc., that are playing a role in this day-to-day operation. So when we think about urban logistics, there are important changes that had happening in the last decade, including for the increase of e-commerce. We have seen an increase of a seamless integration of portion venues that allow many of these companies that integration between social networks and even devices that allow us to access any product in the world by making just some clicks on our phones. We can, and that only had changed, had increased the e-commerce, but also have changed our expectations as a customer. The possibility of comparing different qualities of products, accessing in the same day or the next day, how much can I compare between, if I want to buy some shoes, how many colors do they have, the sizes that they have, what is the quality of the product, and I can compare in different platforms in just a couple minutes and then make that decision really fast. So I'm also considering the change of how the customer, the expectations of the customer or where the product is being delivered to have changed, and we still don't know a lot of how that thing will continue to change. Another driving change is that awareness and cities establishing goals of reducing emission. How do we get a sustainable and efficient system that will meet those climate emission goals and will reduce emissions in the pace that we need it to happen in order to meet our climate goals? And at the same time, we have a growth of the urban population. A UN study said that in 2050, 2/3 of the population will be living in urban areas. So just imagine the amount of demand for goods and services that we need to meet in just a couple years, and how we're gonna manage all that influx of products that are coming into that urban area. In the last decade, we have seen e-commerce sales steadily keep growing year to year. This is just showing from 2010 to 2019, so this is pure COVID. And all the projections expected this to continue to grow for the years to come. And with all these different challenges that we have in the urban area, this increase of e-commerce and changing and how where those trucks are going. So for example, just just think 10 years before. We go to IKEA or the Target, the really big stores, and then you get all your products there. But now, instead of having a really big truck delivering to Target, then we have a set of vans that are delivering to each of the different neighborhoods. So that really has shifted the model of the delivery. So many of these companies addressing these challenges and these the cost of their operations have trying to make some innovations and changes, including mode shift. We have seen all very successful cases all over Europe, and some fewer examples in the US, but with a really successful one here in the city of Portland with a Portland company-owned Beeline of making those deliveries in the cargo bikes. And then we are seeing a lot of innovation of different type of modes that might be used for that final delivery. We're also seeing a storage format changes. So from companies going from these really big boxes to smaller formatting closer to the customer in their urban areas, and using their stores for like a micro distribution location, where from that point they can do a lot of the e-commerce delivery. We can see a lot of the stores, if you go to your Target, Nordstrom, or any other stores, they now have a particular area for those delivery and pickup locations as they're adjusting to this new model. And then for many of the carriers, for example, UPS, FedEx, or your Amazon Prime, a lot of the cost also is being reflected in the failed delivery. So when you try to make a delivery and then the customer is not there, or there is not a safe place to deliver your package, the package needs to go back to the truck, then go again to the warehouse, then get sorted out to get into a new route and get delivered another time. And that puts a really high cost to many of the carriers. So how do you reduce that? And also, how do you gain consolidation? Because if you're just making one small package delivered to many different locations, that puts a lot of extra miles and a lot of extra costs to your operations. So how do you get a little bit of consolidation and reduce your costs? And one of those solutions is using lockers, or for example, alternative location, like renting out a space in your grocery and retail store that you can drop off that package in the case the customer is not there, or that the customer can use for those returns. And that's a way of saving some cost, to reducing the cost, gaining consolidation also in your operations. And I wanted to show some of the pictures for particularly the mode shift. We are seeing a bunch of different configurations of e-bikes in Europe and in the US that are being tested and being used for different carriers for these last mile operations. And these include UPS in Seattle and Portland with their cargo bikes. We have DHL in New York putting that container that you can attach to the e-bike, to this e-bike that you can just put a trailer on and the little box of Amazon right there. I think this is a case in California. And then you have in Latin America and Spain using motorcycles and bikes for that food delivery services. Because bikes and motorcycles is not new. Like a lot of, in the developing world, a lot of the deliveries are made through bikes, because you get over that congestion and don't worry a lot of the space where you need to park, especially when you have low volume deliveries. This is a case from Amazon in India, also a pilot. And this even go really back to basics. This is a case in New York when you have so much density that you just put all the packages in one pallet, and from that point you deliver, because you have really a lot of high-rise, many stories that you have to deliver. So you could have 20, 50 packages just to one particular tower. So this makes more sense for those operations to the driver. And then you can go really tech to those robots that are being tested in cities all over the world. We have some cases here. These have been tested out in San Francisco, UK, and Colombia. And then we go to this type of car prototype. from Neuro, another company thinking about grocery deliveries and how to preserve the freshness of the product once you're making those grocery deliveries. You can see all these type of drones or little robots that might be doing those final delivery little packages to your front door. But with all these different topics, what are the consequences that we're seeing? I'm particularly looking at as a municipality perspective. Like I say, we are seeing the consolidation of the demand, and that means smaller, like a bigger fleet of smaller vehicles rather than to have these really big trucks. So more demand for the curb for locations that we didn't expect to have demand for when we're diverging those volumes to the local streets, to our neighborhoods. So how do we manage that demand, that competition for the curb, including the raise and the need for those commercial operations? And then we're seeing, in particular, really dense urban areas like New York, that the curb becomes like a little micro consolidation and sorting space, because you have so many packages that you need to reorganize them and think about what story or what particular customer is that product to. So just think about the current loading and unloading infrastructure that we're providing the space for parking. We in Portland, Seattle, New York, those three cities definitely have a restriction of 30 minutes that you can use the curbs on for loading and unloading. If you're making these type of operations, the one on the right, you're definitely staying more than 30 minutes there. So thinking about what is the current operation that are happening in our streets and what is need and what is the spectrum of the different operations, because this is a set of operations, but trying to understand the diversity of those operations is really important to allocate all these needs at the curb in the most efficient way. And then these packages are also getting into our residential buildings, office buildings. So how do we address all these influx of packages for buildings that didn't design any space for this package delivery? So just to summarize, last mile challenges, there are many last mile challenges. Particularly, we have the failed delivery that really increase that cost for the carrier. A lot of operation costs due to that less of consolidation. We have a lot of congestion that needs to be overcome, many times inadequate spaces to park and to do that unload operations. And then we have safety issues, particularly when we talk about those mode competition. You're having a truck and you have the bikes or the pedestrian or transit happening at the same time. So how do we allocate all of that in the safest way possible? As you have seen in many of my pictures, I talk about the load and unload infrastructure, and I wanted to highlight that because particularly in urban freight research, this is an understudy area that we have of the last mile segment. We think a lot about mobility and the intermodal facilities, but this is a section that we have not done a lot of research. We have a vast lead review of passenger parking behavior, but we don't have the same understanding for commercial vehicles, particularly with all these increase of e-commerce and how that has shifted the operations. And I think it's really important to understand what are the different set of operations that are happening there regarding dwell times and the needs that we need, like not just thinking about the space where that vehicle parks, but it's also how is that vehicle gonna get out of the truck, gonna go to that, open that door, do the unload. Maybe he will need an additional equipment to do that. And what is the connectivity between that particular location and the final customer? Because this is an environment that drivers need to navigate every day. And as my PhD advisor said, she really likes to say, it's like we're planning a transit system where you didn't plan for the bus stop. So considering that connection is really important, because if we understand that connectivity, we can reduce the dwell time that vehicle is in there, and therefore use the curve for more users, so a bigger turnout of that curve. And this is a section that have not really been studied, and we call it in the Urban Freight Lab the final 50 feet, because in a lot of the studies are showing worldwide, not only in Seattle, but Asia and Europe, it seems to be around 60 to 87% of the time, particularly for the final delivery, 87% of that time is spent outside the vehicle. Then again, goes to that term of deconsolidation. If I have 50 packets for one particular tower, 20, that's gonna take a lot of my time of that delivery. Instead of me just moving around, a lot of the time it's gonna be outside that vehicle. So how do we gain that consolidation in the way that we can get that driver as fast as possible back to their vehicle? And I really like this picture. Continuing in the same idea is that he parked in the right location. He unloads and unloads the packages, but now he needs to walk to the final customer in these really congested sidewalks, going through stairs or elevators or whatever other infrastructure between that parking location and the final customer. So to continue the presentation, I just wanted to contextualize a little bit of the current movement, the current moment that we're living with COVID. And a lot of studies have been made in the last year evaluating how much we have changed and how much e-commerce has grown. If you remember the first graphic I showed you about e-commerce, the growth has been like 1% incrementally, but in the last year, some of the studies have shown to 4 to 5% increase of the retail sales on the e-commerce, and that depends on what type of product we're talking about. So there was, based on the US Census data, in America, we spent, it was an increase of almost 33% of overall the retail sales for e-commerce, which is a really important percent. And then here, this is also from the US Census Bureau. The gray color is the first quarter of 2020, so prior to pandemic. And you see for every single product, there has been a really significant increase of e-commerce. And even though the first quarter, when we saw the lockdowns happening and everybody had to stay home, you can see that blue color that really important increase, and then going down a little bit, but even though it has gone down in the last 2 quarters of 2020, it's still pretty high compared to pre-pandemic times. And these have forced many businesses to reassess the traditional business that they have, and how to focus more on the digital part of their business, in investing in e-commerce software and focusing on online marketing challenges. And even though this is very uncertain and how long this customer migration to the digital space will continue, it's definitely gonna change the future. We move forward with some particular models just gonna continue, for example, at curb or store pickup and drop off. And then the access to online services for many companies that didn't have those services before. But one thing that I wanted to highlight during COVID and e-commerce, and this is quoting one study for a really awesome researcher in the urban freight space, Miguel Fligliosi, is that he took a look at COVID impacts, particularly for the Portland area. And there are a couple of really interesting studies in Sweden. I think there was one in Latin America, and I can remember a couple other ones that have been made, talking about inequalities, how COVID has shown inequalities of e-commerce. And this is not due to COVID. Like he mentioned in the study, it just have brought it to light, the inequalities that was preceding to the pandemic, and just that the lockdown has exacerbated. Based on the studies in Portland, what he found is that 68% of the households with delivery rates that have 10 per month of the delivery rate had annual incomes greater than 50,000. And 70% of the household that received 0 delivery service had annual income below the 50,000. This is really how we have to put it in context. In a moment when we have a global pandemic and you're not able to get out of your house, every time you get out of your house, you could have more exposure to the risk of getting COVID. And then you don't have access to a cell phone, or your area or your neighborhood cannot be serviced to the particular product that you need. We are really exacerbating those inequalities. So when we think about mobility and accessibility, in the term that we understand it as transportation professionals, we should also be including in that language online home delivery service. So how much those vulnerable communities really have access to the service, and how we can use also in a beneficial way this service to provide to people that might not be able to get out of their house because of a disability or whatever other reason may be. How do we provide access to people that we don't have access right now? So just to wrap it up a little bit on the urban freight aspect, I challenge you to go to Google and just type there sustainable city or smart city or city of the future. And you will see that a lot of the ideas that we have for livable neighborhood and what the future should look like, people don't really think about freight. And I will challenge you to see a picture of that future where you can see a truck or a delivery vehicle. And I think that is counterproductive because, as I mentioned before, this is an essential component of the livability of any city. And so I'm really excited to be part of PBOT because we really have that approach of freight, and how do we well integrate that system to all the different plans that we have in the city, from transit to pedestrians to auto mobility, as part of the policy making process and city governance. In fact, there is a need for freight planning in tools in the US city. There was a study that was done in my lab, and back in 2018, after a deep dive of all the planning tools in the US, only 4 cities had like advanced freight plans that really took a look not only at the regional movements, but thinking about the city overall. Portland was one of them back in 2006, and as you can see, Washington DC in 2013, Atlanta 2015, and Seattle 2016. So Portland was really ahead of the time. And since that study in 2018, we have other set of cities that have really recognized the importance of including freight in the planning policy. New York, I think it was either this year or last year, just released a really comprehensive study on urban freight. So we're seeing like more cities investing in this type of plan and including freight as part of the city planning policies. So let's talk about the 2040 Portland Freight Plan. So like I said, we have the city of Portland had back in 2006 a freight master plan, and it was a 20-year plan from, and now we are developing the update of that plan, accounting not only for all these changes in city logistics, but also aligned to the goals that the city have defined of what the future should look like, talking about sustainability, equity, sustainability and equity. So the 2040 freight plan is about planning how to move goods throughout the city while meeting our goals for a safe multimodal system that supports economic prosperity, human, environmental health, equity, and resilience. Again, really aligned to those goals that the city has defined. And just to put in context a little bit of what is the context of our region, Portland is a West Coast seaport and a distribution hub, just like LA or San Francisco Bay Area or Seattle and Tacoma. And these metro areas really serve as gateways for international trade and distribution hubs for the regional and domestic movement, with that being really close to that, particularly the Asian market. In fact, Portland is a trade-based city. It is the number 13 in the nation for export as the share of their GDP. But like I mentioned, part of this update is not only considering those really important regional movement, but also considering all this complexity and different modes that we have. From the ports, from the airports, rail, to the really big heavy loads, to that cargo bike or those smaller vans that are making those final deliveries into our local streets. And two really important questions that we need to address as we are developing the 2040 freight plan is how would it advance equity and address structural racism? And the second one is, will it reduce carbon emission? So for the project plan, we have included a really important public involvement effort. We have 3 different committees, which we are updating in a regular basis, and we're getting a lot of feedback from them. One is the Technical Advisory Committee, that is a set of policymaking and planners from different agencies, including from PBOT. And we also have the Community Advisory Group, where we have a very diverse group of voices from different members of the community. And then we have the Portland Freight Committee, which is more industry stakeholders. And part of that public effort is also getting information from the community, and we are putting in place a survey need soon in the following weeks to gather information and feedback from community, and particularly community that we haven't heard before in previous efforts related to freight at PBOT. We also did a very, we're diving into a state of the system report, taking a look at current condition, job trends that we're seeing in the Portland area. And then we're also looking policy, plan, and program review. So really deep diving into best practices, e-commerce trends, freight industry trends, and how do we gather all that knowledge to make the best decisions moving forward for our plan. And then identifying the needs and conflicts of opportunity. Our consultant is really helping in a set of analyses, looking at safety, mobility, and all the different needs, and also gathering feedback from all the different community committees that we're working with and the community too. And then we're gonna develop and evaluate those solutions based on all that research, public outreach, and then define those implementation strategies, and then go to the city adoption process. It's really important to mention that we have in Portland a very, we have established a freight network, and that was one of the 26 freight master plan. And we have defined these different categories of freight network classification. And part of this effort is also trying to update, if we need to, some of these network elements. Think about what is the current conditions, do we need to readjust, or and then also looking at future conditions. It's going to be a really important increase of trucks in that particular network element that we might need to put in a higher classification for that particular network, or maybe not. Maybe there have been some changes in the industrial land that we don't have these really intense freight line use, so there is no need to have a really high classification for the freight network in those particular locations. So this is one of the efforts that we're doing as part of the freight plan, updating this network as best as possible for that, looking at 20 years from now. And then part of the work that we have been doing together with our consulting is identifying those freight needs, as I mentioned before. And this is just showing part of the work that we have done until now. We really diving into safety, thinking about where were the locations, hotspots that we're seeing, a lot of the crashes that involve trucks, not like fatalities and crashes that involve trucks, and also overlaying each of these different studies, overlaying that with the equity matrix. So thinking not only where are the highest numbers, but also how is that correlated to the locations where we have these important communities, vulnerable communities, that to see what is the impact to this community, accounting for that equity component in our analysis. And we did that for safety. Here you can see the hotspots of the locations that we have identified for the city of Portland. And then we took a look at mobility. So using the metro regional model, evaluating current and future conditions based on that model, we identify where particular locations we will have a really important increase of trucks volume and therefore delay and impact into a transportation network. And then the same goes when we think about environment. This is just the analysis for particular matter, but we are also evaluating other types of emissions as part of our analysis. And this is comparing particular matter, again, overlay with that equity matrix to really take a look of what communities are we impacting to with that movement of freight volumes in our city. And then we also evaluate economies and jobs, meeting the freight needs of local businesses from large to small. We are creating a really important source of jobs related to the freight and transportation sectors in the Portland region. So it was really important for us also to investigate and do an analysis, trying to understand some of the occupations and wages trends of the freight industry in Portland. And that's a report we're currently working on. It's not finalized, but we're hoping to have it done in the following weeks. And just to give you a taste of going a little bit more concrete of what particular best practice or policies or recommendations we might include in our plan. This is a particular area that we have been focused on in the last couple of months regarding greenhouse emissions and what policies might be good for our city. We know that in Oregon, transportation accounts for 35% of the greenhouse emissions, and freight transportation accounts for 31% of the transportation emissions. It's a really high percentage when we compare the volume of freight vehicles that we have in the traffic flow, which is around 10 to 50%. So really freight accounts for a really big share of those emissions compared to the amount of vehicles, the vehicle share of the traffic. And when we talk about on-road diesel vehicles, and I focus on diesel vehicles because diesel vehicles are mostly freight vehicles, it accounts for 50% of those diesel emissions in the city of Portland. And we can see here 73% is the rail on the board. So I see freight as a sector with a really important opportunity of how we can address and find solutions that will really meet those climate goals that we have for our city. So our consultant and we also have been doing a really important research, looking at all the opportunities and best practices that have been implemented in the US, but also worldwide, and what have been working in those cities, what are the barriers, what are the considerations we should be taking into account, what are the benefits, what are successful stories. And here is a list of all of the potential best practices that we have to take a look at, including clean vehicle technology, loading and unloading areas that have been discussing a lot in this presentation, to last mile solution, including mode shift or lockers, micro hubs, to share spaces for transit and freight, to all the way to congestion pricing. liberate some space in our road network, and then having those vehicles, the freight vehicles, to move by and don't get stuck on traffic idling and producing those emissions. So just wanted to highlight two of them to give you an example to what we're doing. We talk about clean vehicle, and I like to use the term clean vehicle technology because you have some people like to use zero emission, but I really like you to think about the life cycle of that vehicle. It's not only producing emissions while it's running, but it's also how much emissions do we produce while we manufacture, the disposal of those batteries, and also what is the source of that electricity. That's three really important aspects that we should consider to really make that conclusion if it's a zero emission vehicle or not. So regarding EVs, we do expect a rapid adoption of those vehicles for commercial vehicles. However, we must consider that there is a low production of electric trucks and long lead times. So the time you have to wait for that product to be ready might take 2 to 3 years. So even if you have all the capital to change all your fleet, you may have to wait, and you have that money waiting until you get those new trucks in your fleet. And then they're really more expensive, but again, we need to consider once we start adopting and the technology gets better, we probably will start seeing those prices go down. And then there is the challenge of how much can that vehicle drive. So we're thinking about shorter trips, not really interstate or moving between states, because right now the capacity is not there yet. And then a lot of the charging infrastructure is being built, but slowly. And also we need to think about the payload capacity, meaning if we have all the trucks charging at the same time, do we really have the capacity of the electric network to provide that that demand for all the trucks? And another case is like off-peak delivery, a very successful program in New York. And but there are several considerations that we need to take it. And when we talk about off-peak delivery, meaning that we shift the deliveries during the day when we have these really high volumes and congestion to off-peak in the afternoon or night period or early morning. And this could really benefit by reduced congestion, emissions, and competition for the curb. But you have to take in account noise impact depending on the neighborhood that you are working on. Certain industry might not be able to do this. And then it might be an extra cost for both the retailer and a carrier, as they need to put somebody in those hours. You might need to pay more, or you might need to have an extra person to accept that delivery. So those are really important considerations to take in account. So finally, for our presentation, one of the efforts and the tasks that we're focusing currently is defining the project goals. And before, just to give you a context, in 2006 Frame Master Plan, we only had identified 3 core values: mobility improvement, liability, and healthy economy for that 20-year time span of that plan. Now, with all the public involvement that we've done with all the different committees, and also in aligned with the city goals, we have identified these 9 types of guiding principles right now. And the goal is that this will help us. So 2 things. First is, what are the goals that we have as a project to achieve as we move forward policy and recommendation on projects? And second is also like identifying the priority of these goals, so we could have a type of rank or a system in which we could evaluate what projects or recommendations or policies should be prioritized. So what system or what evaluation system we will be using for that. And I think, so part of our goal as the next part of this class is to really discuss these goals, and we would really like to get your feedback as we are moving forward on defining these goals and identifying the priority of these goals. And with that, that's the final part of my presentation. I don't know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. I think we're good on time, okay?
Yeah, we are getting it. Thank you so much, Gabriela. Thank you, Denver, for the introduction at the beginning. There seems to be quite a bit of conversations going on in the chat room. I found some really great just chats between students. I don't see any specific questions, so unless I'm missing something. So I'm going to do a hand raise, and let's, rather than going through the chat conversation, I think there's some great conversations going on, but I want to take some questions as we get them via a dialogue with the students. So I see Joan's hand up right now. So Joan, we'll take your question.
Thank you so much. This is a new framing for me in terms of thinking about the city and transportation. And I have this inclination to say, well, let's get the cars off the road, and, we'll get freight and buses and bikes. I'm sure there'd be no controversy over that decision. But then we come back to the issue of diesel and air pollution. And I've recently learned that Multnomah County has like the 5th worst diesel pollution of any county in the country. And while that disproportionately affects poor communities of color. I live near I-5, so I think about this myself. But then on the flip side of that, something that I hear happening is when people start talking about achieving climate goals, sometimes some agencies like ODOT, or sometimes like the Truckers Association or whatever, will start saying things like, well, we're hiring minority contractors, so if you make this more expensive, they won't be able to do this work. Or we're this is going to benefit communities of color. And it seems like this incredibly kind of cynical, like I mean, personally, I don't think it's sincere. I think it's, it's really complicated because the communities that are sort of bearing the most burden of this diesel pollution are then also sort of being used as like the reason we can't possibly improve things, and make it better. And it's really complicated. And I'm just wondering if you could, I know there's not like an easy answer, but I'm presuming you know what I'm talking about. So can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, no, John, that's an awesome question. And yeah, I think it's really complex. Like you said, I don't have an answer, the solution for that right now. And I think that's a really ongoing conversation, and a conversation that we need to move forward. I think there is a reality of the market right now, and that's what I wanted to highlight on my presentation. Because if everybody had access to electric vehicles, that would be one thing. But like, even if you have all the willingness to change your fleet right now, you cannot do it. So we were having this discussion in the community advisory group, and they were saying, I could put $30,000 right now, and I have to wait 3 years to get it. So that's one thing. So even if we wanted everybody to change right now to electric, there are not electric vehicles right now. And even the electric supply is not there yet. So how do we provide the charging infrastructure and the electric capacity to charge up the vehicles, and then get manufacturers to produce the amount of electric vehicles we need? So those are really important nuances. So it's not only if are they willing to change the electric fleet. So those are a couple of things. There are a couple of approaches that we are still thinking and we have to evaluate. One thing is to change to alternative fuel in the meantime, what the electric technology is there. So you don't have to change your truck, you only have to change the fuel. But there are discussions, how do we talk with trucking industry? Does that make sense? How do we prove those operations cost really does make sense. I really have a really interesting conversation with Keith, who's here now, right? Like he's making the numbers on the operations cost that we can show. This is a case study. Keith is changing 90% of his fleet to alternative fuel, and this is a way we can do it. But I think, so for example, one of the things that I see positive, Oregon State is taking a look at the CARB rule, so like clean electric vehicles and low NOx emissions for vehicles. So addressing the manufacturing side to try to get more electric vehicles and clean vehicle technology accessible for people to buy. But I think that's the first barrier I see right now, not so much of making people buy, because I don't think it's the power to buy right now, not the charging infrastructure to feed those electric vehicles. So I totally agree with you, but I will say that I think there are some barriers before that we need to address to go there. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you, Joan. Jimmy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just, or can you hear me okay? I have a...
There's quite a bit of feedback.
Okay, yeah.
No, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
If it's a question, maybe you can just ask it and we'll, with your headphones on, and we'll get the question at least. Now I can't hear him.
I wanted to apologize. I just saw there's a lot of comments here in the chat. I didn't see it.
Yeah, so he's got some microphone issues. So I want to take a question in the chat, and Jimmy, what you could do is actually put the question in the chat. So Kathy has a question. Let's address this one before we go to break. How can we meet climate goals if this pattern continues and accelerates? Well, freight delivery needs change when our consumption patterns change as well. I would say yes. When we shop local, or has PBOT done modeling of a less intense consumption climate? So that's a question that's in the chat from Kathy. And perhaps we can address, see if you can answer some of those. And then if Jimmy, maybe you could ask your question in the chat. I see you hanging out with your Siamese cat.
Yeah, on the consumption side, I think that's an awesome question. And I don't think I have an answer yet to that. I was talking with my PG advisor about these, because I was in this conference in Sweden and we were talking about e-bikes. And e-bikes is really successful in Europe, but if we're seeing the ports right now and the amount of goods that are coming into our urban areas, are we really thinking we're gonna put all those goods in e-bikes? I don't see how we can do that in the current environment of customers waiting for a pencil or a notebook in 2 hours delivering to their houses. So, and I was in a conversation with Amazon, and they were saying, like, where we are meeting the customer, I can't remember. Oh yes, the term was customer obsession. So we're just creating to meet the customer obsession. And my thinking is like, but you're creating also that the customer needs and are expecting this in 2 hours, and just like when we're ordering, we have the option of getting everything consolidated in one day, and many people don't choose that. We just order one package for the notebook, and then another package for that shirt, and another package for whatever other thing we're ordering. So how do we think about that in the customer? But addressing, I don't think the solution is putting that on the customer. I think it's how do we talk to the big retailers that are moving these customer patterns to change a little bit and think about green logistics, and how do we get consolidation. Like I said, that's why I really like this term of getting consolidation, trying to reduce instead of one package, how do we educate the consumer, but also change the way we are operating right now, because everybody's trying to meet Amazon operations, and that's not sustainable, particularly for the smaller and medium company. So I think that's still an open question. We still need to understand a little bit of the customer behavior. I know Europe is trying to change people to go to lockers, so we don't have to get those deliveries to our homes to get that consolidation. In the US seems to be a little bit of a barrier yet to change a little bit. Instead of me receiving at home, going to a particular location to pick up my packages. But those are still open questions that I don't know. I don't see the answer yet, but if we're expecting every good to get in 1 or 2 hours to our home, it's not gonna be sustainable.
Thank you, Gabriela. So I see Sam's hand is up. I actually do want us to go to break, but maybe we could address 2 questions. First, Jimmy's and Sam. So Jimmy had put the question into the chat, and I think this is a last mile question, really, is how does the effects of the last leg of freight at restaurant, delivery, online purchases, how does that affect the modes and the movement, restricting traffic in the residential area? Is that a problem or is it not?
Wait, so the question is if the movement of those freight vehicles into our local streets, so like residential neighborhood, is
Yeah,
impacting traffic.
yeah.
Yes, that definitely is impacting traffic, particularly in very dense area or narrow streets. How do we accommodate those flow of vehicle? And like I mentioned in the presentation, the cities have not accounted for that movement on those neighborhoods because we have the big truck moving to Target instead of all these little deliveries that are happening in our local roads. And particularly when you have really dense neighborhoods or like I said, narrow streets, and then you have 20, 50 packages in New York for one particular tower. How do you accommodate of that influx? And it's definitely impacting congestion and the curb competition. And then also that conflict between modes of having those trucks at the same time of having that pedestrian flow, that bike flow in that same area. And I just saw that Jimmy was saying that in Sweden, yes, people pick the package at the local grocery store instead of their homes and apartments. Yeah.
Sam, do you want to ask a quick question and then we can go to break?
Okay, sure. I guess it's who owns the ground rights. It seems to me like if you're dealing freight, you need to get the container from the port or the trucking facility or the airport to your distribution center, your regional, and then you need to divide that up and get it to your local distribution center. I mean, really, it's a simple math problem. You add the cost of 20 million per mile for a tunnel versus the added cost of congestion pricing and tolls and e-commerce delivery fees. At some point, they're going to play their hand. Okay, we're going to do a tunnel, and it's our tunnel. It's not FedEx, it's not UPS, it's my Amazon tunnel. And then somebody else does it. We need it. So it seems like we need a tunnel czar. And my question is, who owns the damn ground? And can we think 3-dimensionally? Are people thinking 3-dimensionally here? Because it sure sounds like it.
So wait, when you say like who owns the ground, you mean what exactly are you questioning? Like the infrastructure?
I'm talking about a Musk tunnel, like in Las Vegas. That's only maybe 50 feet deep, and it's 14 feet in diameter, and they run electric vehicles through it. And it seems, and all the freight companies have invested in, electric transport. So I think they'd fit in that tunnel, and it will be maybe a cost-effective solution at some point to connect to those rail yards or ports or airports to their distribution center. So, I mean, it creates all this competing tunnel infrastructure. I mean, I don't, you know, is that realistic? I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, when I went to this conference in Sweden, they were talking about using the river for putting packages on and then having like you open, so the package is below the river and then you need the package and it just pops out. And there was this idea of having like something flying by and then you see all the drones delivering to the little house. So all these type of different ideas of what the future is going to look like, and definitely tunnels is one solution. So if you see Disneyland, actually you don't see any waste management trucks on Disneyland because everything is moved on tunnels. All the commodities in Disneyland are moved through tunnels. So that's actually one of the solutions that have been talked about, but like, who pays for that tunnel? Are we gonna have, like you said, Amazon brand tunnel or what? I think it's a really interesting question, and how much do we have as resource to put those infrastructure in place, and where we're gonna have the benefits of those of that investment. But also regarding equity, who gets access to those goods and those flows and those infrastructure is, I think, a really important question. But I think how the future is going to look like and what infrastructure, I think that's yet to be seen, and how those different companies think what is most efficient for them. So I think right now the playground is really open to all these possibilities of solutions. And we need to test it and pilot and gather the data to actually say this is sufficient, and that's what should we do in accounting for sustainability and equity goals that we have as a city.
Yeah. Important work. Still a lot to be done. Good questions and great presentation. Thank you so much, Gabriela. We are 3 minutes away from 8 o'clock, so I do want to give us a 10-minute break. And then after the break, we will do an exercise on Jamboard. So most of you have received my email, and when we come back from our break, we'll participate in this exercise to answer some of these questions and look at some visions. Gabriela did a really good job of asking some discussion questions as a result of the presentation. So we'd like to engage you in that. So why don't we break for about 10 minutes? Looks like we've, this is probably the lowest attendance in classes. Students, I think there's just a lot of things going on right now. So we have a total of 15 participants in the room right now. So originally what we had planned for was 3 breakout groups, but with about 14 of us, including Gabriela, Denver, and Ananda. What our plan is to break it into 2 groups versus 3. And so within those 2 groups, we can have a good intentional conversation and feedback. So what was created earlier and sent earlier via email, and also the in your Google Drive, is the instructions and some of the instructions for the breakout exercise, as well as a Jamboard. So it's also testing your technology skill. I don't know if any of you have used Jamboard. I've used it on a couple of facilitation projects. It's kind of a nifty, cool program in which you can pretend you're in a setting and put together some sticky notes and ideas. And we could do kind of a screen share here in the main room as to what it looks like. We'll go through the questions before we break out into the 2 groups. And then after we spend about 15 minutes answering these questions, we'll come back as a group and then do a report out. So what I would like to do is, within these 2 groups, is to have somebody designated as the speaker. So I'll have assign someone from the student to return back as a speaker, as a report back. But mainly in this period of time, let's go through this, and then we'll also go through and do our sticky use Jamboard and present ideas into sticky notes. So if you want to, Gabriela, I think you said that you're going to screen share the Jamboard as a group so that everyone gets familiar with it. Go through that. Kind of a fun exercise.
Yeah, again. I think you should be able to see it now. So like I said, I presented the 9 goals that we have defined for the 2043 plan. And here you can see these 9 goals with each of them with their definition. So part of the breakout room, this is a Jamboard software or setting, and you will be able to navigate. I created 5 slides per group, and the first one you can see that goals and the goals definition. And then we have the first question, which is feedback on the current goals and their definition. Do you see any goals related to each other or like overlapping between them? And then do you think there are any definition improvements of the ones that we currently have? And then the second question, is there any additional goals that we haven't considered that we may have missed that you think we should include? And the third one is, in your opinion, remember I mentioned like we want this ranking or evaluation system, what to prioritize. Therefore, we would like to hear your opinion on what of those goals should be, or what are the most pressing issues in your opinion. And then finally, are there any particular locations in your community or that you know in the Portland area that you particularly have experienced regarding concerns and issues related to those 2043 goals that we listed? So yeah, those are the 4 questions, and you are able to use this as a Jamboard. You can see here, how do I move across the different slides? But also you have here the sticky notes, which you will be able to write, I don't know, economic, I'm just gonna put a word in there, and you can put save, and then you can move it around and make it smaller and stick it up in the slide. You can also put text if you want, so you should be able to write to information in there. So you can use either of those 2 options to provide your feedback while we're having that discussion. I think that pretty much covers it, Tui. I think I can share also the link here on the chat in case.
Oh, that's right. Let's share the link. Forgot about that. I can share that.
Oh,
That's
wait.
one thing on my mind. It's like the first thing to do. Share the link. Okay.
Here.
So we'll do 2 breakouts. One will have Gabriela and the other one will have Denver. Ananda and I will be able to float between the 2 rooms. And then each of you should pull up Jamboard onto your computer and start the sticky notes. And we will return back at, let's say at 8:30. So we have a good 15 minutes for this. So I'll let Ananda do her magic and send us to our rooms. Okay, click join.
Hello. You're muted.
Oh, we're back here, but I think everyone is still in the breakout room.
Yeah, they should, they got a notification. It should say like closing in 60 seconds.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. I was like, hey, this class went by fast. The breakout room exercise went by fast.
I know, yeah.
Doesn't seem to be enough time.
I know, it's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah. So this is good and give us a chance to
Yeah.
get everybody back, and then we can do a report out. We're back. We are back, and we have a few minutes to do a report out and a kind of a quick check-in before we close for the night. So shall we start with group 1? Who is our designated speaker for group 1? Jimmy, is your microphone on? No, we can't hear you.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, once I was back, it muted. It was like my group could hear me. Okay, so I think so in the feedback, current goals and their definition, I think one of the biggest things was we wouldn't talk about in the resilience, getting energy independence for the city instead of relying on other states or out-of-state energy resources. We thought that part of the resilience should be having that locally. Same with environmental health. Like instead of tying that to separate, like it's really hard to tie environmental health like away from like social health or some of the other like individual, let me bring that up, like safety requirements. That's kind of all tied together. So maybe some of these definitions could be consolidated. Okay. And for question 2, is there an additional goal we may have missed? Let's see, consumption and its impact on climate and how freight community can address it beyond switching to e-vehicles. Yeah, so what can we do for freight besides just switching to e-vehicles, like on a grand scale? And the most pressing issues we came up with for question 3 were the environmental issues. It seems like most greenhouse gases are not done by individuals, but by large systems of like large freight systems or large systems. So that seems like a really good place to where we can reduce greenhouse emissions. And we did not have time to get to question 4, so sorry.
But it looks like you got some good sticky notes, whereas in our group 2, we didn't do many sticky notes. So we're gonna have to do this by memory.
It wasn't much time, so.
Yeah, we talked a lot, but I think there was a lot of similarity. I brought up the idea of relatedness between all the definitions, basically, which was just similar to just consolidating a lot of them. I think it's almost impossible to have one without the other. You know, resilience and environmental health and speaking about equity, I think they're all very much related. Kathy brought up a good point, which was perhaps having 2 different categories, one mainly freight, one, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, one with the relationship between people and freight. Let me make sure here. People relationship to the system, equity. So the freight system and then the people system. I think that's kind of what you were saying, Kathy. Okay, I got a thumbs up. And then we basically talked after that about the consumption issue. I think that's a huge thing to tackle when we talk about where we are on this planet right now with regard to environment, capitalism, what have you, and where is it headed? I think there's a big question mark if we can at all sustain this. My guess is no, but if we can't sustain this kind of growth, then how do we address that? And so we talked about hyper local transportation system, freight system, perhaps using cargo bikes more, and relieving the congestion from our streets. So, you know, as we all know, there's the Beeline business here that delivers kind of last mile products. I've thought about how can we get USPS to participate in that, and UPS throughout the city, FedEx, and you know those kinds of systems. I think it would go a long way to making our city more livable. Certainly would reduce the stress, I think, on even the drivers, not having to worry about parking, and you know, reduce the conflict between everybody. So yeah, that's I think that I'll stop there.
Thank you, Hami. There's some really great conversations going on in the chat room also. So I really appreciate having everyone being here still and engaged. I think this is a very, very important topic. Thank you so much, Gabriela and Denver. Can we give them a hand of applause? I think it's just amazing just to have them here. We haven't done this so much in this class, but it's one of the great things that we could show appreciation to our speakers. And we are right at 8:40. So if there's any other last words, parting thoughts from anyone, feel free to chime in. If not, I would wish you all a very wonderful evening, a great week, a weekend, and I will see you next week. Continue to work on your project. Let us know if you have any questions. Yes, Jimmy, you say you have a question about office hours. Yes.
Yeah, how does this work? I saw the email that you have them, but how do I contact you for them?
Email me. And
okay.
Yeah, email me when you're available.
All right, because I just have some questions about the project, but
yeah.
We'll sort that out next week.
Yeah, just send me an email. Let me know when you're available. Ananda has her, I think the Zoom open, but I don't use the Zoom. I use Teams more often. So just send me an email and then we can schedule a time.
Okay, great.
You can just pop into mine. It's just open.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Wednesday 4 to 5, you just pop in. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. Bye.
Thank you.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Maybe I should use mine as a pop-in also. I haven't done that.
It's a little bit easier.
Is it? Yeah. Do you have specific questions? I can, it is kind of late, but yeah, just let me know. Jimmy.
The main thing is I came into this course, I didn't know anything about it. I just would show up to the, what do they call, the Young Professionals in Transportation like events.
Yeah.
I just happened to run into them and someone told me about the class and I signed up. So I just like to talk more about what approaches I can make for the project. And I realize it's getting kind of late in the class, so I got to do this now. So
yeah.
But I'll email you and we'll set up a time.
Yeah, just email me and we'll set up a time.
Okay, cool.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Yeah. Let's stop recording.